Hey, what's up, everyone? I hope you're having a fantastic evening. Today, what we're talking about is language impaired kids. So, if you know of someone who has a kid who's struggling with language, or if you yourself are a parent of one, we're looking at language impaired kids and their ability to balance on one leg, and if there's actually a link between the two of poor balance and language impairment. So they actually did a study, and when they compared language impaired kids versus a group with normal language ability, the control of balance when standing on one leg is much different between the groups. And it's because the centers involved with language may be linked with the centers involved with balance. And one reason for that is if you think of the lower brain centers, they most work on a subconscious level. So it's not things that you have to think about. And they control our most basic functions like posture and balance and proprioception. So when I talk about proprioception, what I mean is if you think of your brain knows where your body's in that space at all the time. So if I were to hold my finger out of my line of sight, I would still know exactly where it's at because of proprioception. So when you think of things like posture, balance, proprioception, these are all going to be functioning at a lower level in your brain and on a subconscious level. You're not going to have to think about them. And your higher level brain is in control of your ability to think and focus and concentrate and problem solve, and I think of it as your school brain. So if the lower centers of your brain are inefficient, like posture and balance and motor planning, then you have to start recruiting your higher level brain to help with that process. So if your lower level brain's having a really hard time with balance and posture, your brain's not just going to let you fall over. You're going to start recruiting your higher level brain since your lower level brain's having such a hard time with it. So if you start recruiting, your school brain or your higher level brain to manage these tasks, then you're going to be able to manage tasks that should be able to be done like on an automatic or subconscious level. Then you're not going to have as many resources left to do things like reading and language and concentration and focus. So if that makes sense, when your lower level brain isn't working as well as it should, you start recruiting your higher level brain, which should be in control of things like when you think of school and learning and focus. When you start recruiting that, that doesn't leave as much room for things like reading and language and concentration. So one reason their lower level brain is inefficient and is because they probably still have primitive reflexes. And these are, what I'm talking about, are specifically a rooting reflex and a palmar reflex. And what primitive reflexes are reflexes you're born with. You have them as an infant, but then they should go away by usually about 6 months of age. So if you still have these primitive reflexes, it makes your lower level brain very inefficient. And one of the things, the rooting reflex, what that is if you were to see an infant and you were to brush the corner of their mouth, what they usually do is they turn to suck and feed. It's a primitive reflex that they have that allows them to be able to feed. So that's why you have it, but then if it sticks around and doesn't go away at 6 months like it should, what you'll see is if you do this to a kid and then they start reflexively moving their mouth or their face or crunching their face every time you stimulate that, that would be an indicator that they still have this primitive reflex. As well as a palmar reflex, which all of you are pretty familiar with. I think if you were to go up to an infant and to put your finger in their hand, they usually will clamp down. That's a palmar reflex. And so that's supposed to also go away at about 6 months. If you were to have a child that's language impaired and you start stroking that right here in their palm, and then they start closing in their hands, that's an indicator that they still have that palmar reflex as well. So when you have these primitive reflexes, what I think of is that it basically keeps your lower level brain in like a training wheel phase, and it doesn't let it mature. So that's why that lower level brain's so inefficient at keeping balance, and then you have to start recruiting this higher level brain, which is going to affect their ability to read and use language and concentrate and focus and things like that. So these are the most commonly involved in kids with language impairment, the rooting and palmar, whether that be they're late to speak, they have poor articulation, among other things. So what we do in the office is we make big stimulations to the higher level brain or the frontal cortex, which is your school brain, and then when that gets stimulated, it realizes how inefficient these primitive reflexes are, and it begins to shut them down, which will allow your lower level brains to run more efficiently and stop having to recruit that higher level brain to help with things as simple as balance and coordination. So that is how, talking about a kid that's language impaired probably also has a tough time with balance, is because the very first thing you need to do is work on their lower level brain, so then it stops recruiting the higher level brain, which is supposed to be in charge of language, but it's too busy and too preoccupied helping the lower level brain with things as simple as balance and coordination. So the number one thing I would do is getting your kid checked for primitive reflexes, see if they have those. That's what we do at the office. We see which primitive reflexes you have, and then when we find out which ones you have, then we give you exercises to do at home to make sure that those go away. And then the cool thing is it's not a long process. It usually, if I had to guess, probably averages about 2 months to get rid of these reflexes, and once they go away, they should be gone forever, which is a good thing. And then that is going to allow your brain to be able to grow and develop the way that it should. So if you have a child with language impairment, I would absolutely see if they have these primitive reflexes, which is keeping their lower level brain not functioning as it should. But with that, that's about all I have for you today, or tonight, I should say. If you have any questions, always feel free to call the office. Our number is 402-504-4676, or if Facebook works better, private message our page. I'll get back to you personally as fast as I can with anything I can help with your child's health. But with that, I hope that you jump on tomorrow evening when we go live again, and I hope you enjoy the content. See you guys tomorrow.